Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar about XML document collaboration. I see more people are joining as I speak, but before I get started, I want to provide you with some general information. This webinar will be recorded, and the recording will be available on the events page on the Oxygen XML website and also on our YouTube channel. Feel free to ask questions at any time during the webinar. You can use the chat panel in the GoToWebinar interface, or you can even ask the questions on Twitter using our hashtags. The agenda for today: first, I'll provide an introduction by talking about modern-day collaboration. And then I'll describe the collaboration scenarios and tools that we use. And the remaining part of the webinar will mostly be about Oxygen Content Fusion. So I'll describe what it is, I'll show it in action, and I'll go into details about the enterprise solution, including the benefits, deployment options, and I'll show you some customization examples. And then I will explain some future plans for Content Fusion. So first off, an introduction. Our whole world has become more and more reliant on mobile and online technologies, and most of us are faced with the need to make our processes more efficient and less expensive. This is certainly also true for the world of creating documentation. One of the biggest challenges that our team has faced over the years is in regards to the collaboration part of the process. And of course, every documentation team has their own set of challenges and requirements. Some teams have greater challenges than others. For example, it's obviously easier to collaborate if all collaborators are located in the same office. Large teams obviously face greater challenges than small teams, and some teams have more aggressive deadlines than others, etc. Regardless, I think it's safe to say that all documentation teams strive to make their processes as efficient, effective, and simple as possible, and everyone is always looking for ways to solve their challenges. So some of the examples of possible challenges that documentation teams might face include collaborators may be spread out amongst multiple locations and even multiple time zones. Collaborators may be working different shifts. Some of them may be traveling. Collaborators may not have access to the same tools or projects. Some teams have inefficient and expensive ways of sharing documents. There may be inconsistencies between methods for providing feedback. And of course, all collaborators are going to have their own set of expertise and motivation and background. And if the process is difficult, the quality of feedback often suffers. It may have time constraints, aggressive deadlines, strict requirements. And some have complicated workflows or lack of integration between tools. Here are some things that I think any collaboration solution should have. It should be efficient and cost-effective. Should be simple and intuitive for all users. Should be accessible online. Should be seamlessly integrated between tools. Should be dynamic and customizable. Should be flexible enough to support any workflow. And of course, you want your data to be secure. So the development of Oxygen XML Web Author has opened up a lot of possibilities for addressing those collaboration challenges. And we have found ways to integrate WebAuthor with other tools that we use for documentation. And in a few minutes, I will be showing you how we use WebAuthor along with Content Fusion to provide seamless integration for all of the collaboration scenarios that we face. So for reference, these are the internal documentation tools that we use. For our versioning control system, we use a Git repository. For the web-based hosting service, we use GitHub. For a visual Git client for committing changes, I personally use SourceTree, but some of my colleagues use an add-on that you can install where it provides a Git client directly within Oxygen. Our data documentation creation tool, we use Oxygen XML Editor or Author. For online review, we use Oxygen XML Web Author. For publishing, we use our WebHelp responsive system using DITA-OT. We also use Oxygen PDF Chemistry for PDF output. For continuous integration, automation, and testing, we use Jenkins. For our project tracking software, we use Jira, and document collaboration, Oxygen, Content Fusion, and other aforementioned tools. This is a chart that basically shows what our documentation workflow looks like, and there are various stages within the workflow where collaboration is required. Once a need for a change or addition in the documentation has been identified, it usually starts with a Jira task and then progresses through various phases. And eventually the Jira task progresses until it's closed, and eventually the documentation gets published. And of course, every organization has its own unique workflow. And one of our goals while developing WebAuthor and Content Fusion has always been to make these tools not only powerful, but also flexible enough to work with any type of workflow. So in our case, most of our collaboration happens within one of three scenarios. The first being the proofreading phase. So after documentation has been created or changed, at some point, somebody will need to proofread it and approve it. Usually this is either the QA team or developers. The second scenario is when somebody notices a problem in the published output. This is usually the support team. Sometimes users also notice problems. And the third scenario is during the creation phase. The documentation team needs to send documents to a subject matter expert to get feedback, ask them to contribute content or make corrections, etc. Now I'll show you what we did to address the challenges that we had for each of these scenarios. I told you that we use Jira for our project and issue tracking software. This is an example of a documentation task, and the developer identified what needs to be done. I made the changes and added a comment saying what I did. And then when I commit, I always use the Jira issue number. And our WebAuthor team has created a script that integrates Jira, GitHub, and WebAuthor so that anytime I use a Jira issue number, when I commit directly in that Jira issue, we have what's called a WebAuthor review bot, and it adds links to the documents that were added or changed. So whoever is proofreading the documentation, they just need to click the link, and this will open the source document in WebAuthor, and they'll be able to see the whole topic, the whole context, and they can add comments, provide feedback, make changes directly in the document. And then after they've made their changes, all they need to do is commit, and I will see their commit in SourceTree. Here's an example of something that was committed using WebAuthor. Now, if you're wondering how to integrate something like this, we don't have documentation for this because it was done in third-party tools. But if you would like to know how we integrated it, and of course it depends on what type of issue tracking software you're using and what type of repository you're using. But you could contact our support staff and we could send you details on how we implemented this, and that could give you ideas of how you could implement something like this for your organization. The second scenario was somebody noticing a problem in the published output. So this is our user guide in web help format. And notice that we have this edit online link in the top right-hand corner of the topic. And again, if somebody, for example, on our support staff notices a problem, they can click that link and it will also open that source document in WebAuthor. And again, they can make changes specifically where they see a correction needs to be made or add comments. And then again, they would commit those changes using the commit action from the menu. And then I would see their change in source tree, and I would pull the changes and integrate it back into our project and address them. We do have documentation for how to add edit links in the output because it is done in Oxygen. So if you go to our Oxygen user guide and search for edit link, you'll see that there's a couple different topics. This first one explains how to add an edit link in Web Help responsive output, either using a publishing template or a transformation scenario. And the second one explains how to add an edit link in PDF output. So we've integrated WebAuthor to make it very efficient for these two scenarios, whether it be proofreading or somebody noticing a problem in the published output. Now, the third scenario is a bit more complicated. In this scenario, it's in the creation phase and a content author needs to send documentation or documents to a subject matter expert. In our case, it's usually a developer. And the expert needs to be able to easily access the documents. It needs to be very easy for them to offer feedback, contribute content, or make corrections. They need to be able to do this from anywhere. Sometimes during the process, communication happens between the expert and the content author. And eventually their feedback or changes need to be sent back to the content authors so they can integrate the changes back into their original documents. So we needed a very dynamic solution. And this led to Oxygen Content Fusion. So what is Content Fusion? It's a flexible collaboration solution designed for any workflow. It provides a seamless integration between documentation tools. It provides an efficient way to send documents to reviewers. It provides a simple web-based interface for reviewers to proofread documents, add comments, or suggest changes. It provides a way for collaborators to communicate. Provides a powerful tool for integrating changes back into the original documents in Oxygen, and it offers countless customization options. What Content Fusion is not. I want to be clear because in the past we've had some confusion about some things. So first, it is not a repository. You are essentially sending a snapshot of the original documents, and there's no risk of changes or suggestions that the reviewers make being committed to a repository. Rather, the snapshot is saved. And then changes to the snapshot can then be merged back into the original documents in Oxygen, and you would then commit or share the documents using whatever method or tools you normally use. Since it was designed to be flexible enough to be used with any workflow, there is no single or linear way to use it. Instead, the possibilities are virtually limitless. And you may ask, why didn't we design it to be more similar to the two scenarios where it is very linear and we allow the proofreader or collaborator to commit directly to the repository? Well, there's various reasons for that, and it's possible that in the future we may have some sort of option for committing, but for one thing, this scenario is usually in the creation phase. The first two scenarios were farther along in the process. The first one was the proofreading phase. The documents have already been created and finalized. They just need somebody to proofread and see if they find any problems. And that second scenario, it was already in the published output. So in these cases, they usually just need very minor changes. But this third scenario is much more fluid and dynamic, where it's in the creation stage, and we found that usually the content author is not going to want the changes or feedback to be committed directly to the repository. They're still in the creation phase. They just want the feedback and changes sent back to them so that they can continue to work and continue the creation process. And more than anything, we really wanted this solution to be as flexible and as possible and make it so that all organizations can use it, regardless of which repository type of repository that you're using and which type of processes and tools that you use. So now I will show it in action. So starting with version 21 of Oxygen XML Editor or Author, Content Fusion comes pre-installed by default, so no additional installation is required. If you happen to be using version 19 or 20, you simply need to install a connector add-on. You would just go to Help, Install Add-ons, and install it. And either way, it contributes this toolbar button. And clicking this button opens the Content Fusion Task Manager view. The first time you open it, you are asked to choose the server. And to be clear, the public option here is only meant for evaluation purposes and should never be used for production. It's there to provide you with a way to try it out before making an investment, but using this evaluation option, you should definitely only use sample documents. The enterprise option is for using your own server, and I will go into much more details about that in a few minutes. So to begin showing you the product, I'll select the public option, and I'll just use some sample projects that come bundled with Oxygen. When you click the connect button, you will be asked to authorize the connection, and if this was your first time using it, you would need to sign up. I already have an account, so I'll just sign in, and I'll click the authorize button. And then back in Oxygen, you see that I can now use the Task Manager view. And in this view in the top right-hand corner, you see who's logged in, and there's a few options and preferences there. This first box is where you drop documents, and that creates a task. And these other boxes are tasks that I created previously. To create a task, there's several ways to do this. If you just want to send the current document, you can right-click anywhere in the editing pane and choose Add File to Review Task. Or you can drag and drop files from the project view. You can also drag and drop from your System File Explorer. If you're using DITA, you can drag and drop from the DITA Maps Manager. And the advantage of this is when you do this, it automatically selects the current route map for the context DITA map section. And there's a note here that says all files referenced in the context map will be uploaded to the server. Really, snapshots of those files will be uploaded. And this is so that all references are resolved properly so that the reviewer sees what you see. I'll give the task a name, click upload, and I could click on this link to open the task in the browser, but the next logical step would be to send a link to this task to a reviewer. And all I have to do is right-click and select Copy Task Link. And then I would send it to whoever I want to review the documents. In our case, we use Slack or email to do this. I'm going to log out of my account. I've created a dummy account so that you can see exactly what a reviewer would see. So all they would do is paste the link in the browser, and then they would sign in or sign up if they haven't already done so. And you see that John Doe is logged in, and it shows them who the task owner was, shows the files to review. They just click on the file, and you see that it's now opened in an online editor. This is WebAuthor integrated in the Content Fusion interface. And they can add comments, make changes. Oops. And notice that all the changes are tracked. It's because the change tracking feature is always on by default. This way, the content author always sees what the reviewers changed. They can communicate directly in the interface. They can add a message here. And back in Oxygen, you'll see that it notifies the content author that there's a message, and clicking that, it'll open the task details in their browser so they can see the messages that were added. Once they're done, they can click this Finalize Review button, and then it indicates that this person is finished reviewing the documents. Now, the editing process is incremental, meaning that only one person can edit it at a time. And this was done to avoid conflicts. And in most cases, this is what users want. So basically, once you exit from the editor back to this task detail screen, it releases the lock on that document. But once I open it back in the editor, I have now locked the file and nobody else can edit it. If I remain idle for a few minutes, it will also release the lock. I'll show you this in action. I'm going to send this link to a colleague, and you'll see what happens when he opens that document. You'll see that it added this red lock icon. And I can open it, but now I'm in read-only mode, and it tells me who's editing it, and I can't continue editing until he's done. And see, I can see his comments directly in the panel. And now the red icon is gone, meaning that he's exited this screen back to the task detail screen, or he's closed the browser, and so now I can edit it. All I have to do is click this Start Editing button, and I'm back in edit mode. Now I'm going to log back out and log back into the content author account so that I can show you the interface from their perspective. You'll see that there's a few more options. The share button, this is if for some reason you need to retrieve the link to the task from the browser. The assign button is for enterprise, the enterprise version, and I'll show you this in a few minutes. In the more menu, you can download or delete the task. In settings, there's just one option at this point. Remember, I said that by default, the change tracking feature is always on, but if for some reason you don't want it to be on, you can turn it off here. From the user menu at the top right-hand corner, if you go to My Tasks, so in this first section, it shows all the tasks that were assigned to me, so somebody else created them. This next section are all the tasks that I created. If I go to the profile screen, I can configure which type of email notifications are going to be sent to me. I'll show you that in my email. See, I was sent an email when John Doe was assigned as a reviewer, when they added a message, when they finalized the review. And the last thing that needs to happen is I want to merge their changes back into the original documents in Oxygen. So you see that it notifies me that there's 3 new messages. Again, I can click on it and I can see what the messages were. And if there's a file change, it gives me access to this Get Changes link. Clicking this opens a built-in merge tool. If there happens to be conflicts of some sort, there's various options for resolving them, but most of the time you can just automatically merge. And there's a preview panel that shows you exactly what section, what is changing. I just click apply and you'll see that their changes have now been merged back into my original document. And then I would continue to work and finalize it and then commit to our repository. So that's how simple and convenient it is. I use it on a daily basis. And not only has it made the collaboration process much more efficient, but it has improved the quality of our documentation because I feel like I get much better and more precise feedback from the subject matter experts. Now I want to go into details about the enterprise solution. So what is it? It's a solution where you host your own server to store content that is uploaded to the Task Manager view. With this model, you set up and configure your own server. This solution also allows you to upload custom frameworks so that all contributors have access to them and they see what you see. You also have the ability to extend the functionality through plugins and configure various options. And a summary of some of the benefits. Snapshots of the content are stored on your own server. You control your own server configuration. You have full control over access to it. You have the ability to use custom frameworks. There are numerous customization options, and you have access to new features in upcoming releases. There are basically 3 deployment options. You can deploy it on your own server using VMware vSphere. It can be deployed on a server hosted on Amazon Web Services or other platforms using an installation kit built to run Ubuntu 18.04. So in most cases, a server or system admin will be the person configuring the server, and this will be very simple and familiar to them, but just to show you an example of how easy it really is. In the Content Fusion user guide, there's a section for server administration guide. And here's the 3 deployment solutions, and each one has instructions. I'm going to show you an example of deploying it on a server hosted on AWS. And there's several options here. This one's recommended for evaluation. This one's recommended for production. I'll show you this evaluation one. And notice that the prerequisites are you need to have an AWS account and you need to create a key pair, which we have already done. So I'll go to the download page and you'll submit your address and you'll receive information back, and that will send you to this download page. And I'll click AWS, the evaluation option, and it sends me to this AWS page. Of course, I would have had to sign in and whatnot if I hadn't already. You'll give it a name and choose the key pair name. Again, if you don't already have one, you would go here and follow the instructions to obtain a key pair. And then you click create. I'm not going to do this because it takes a few minutes to process. I don't want to bore you with that. But once it's complete, you reach this page. It'll look just like this, and the status will be create complete. And now I just need the IP address. This can be obtained from the Resources tab. You click on the instance, and here's my IP. I can also copy it to the clipboard from down here. I need to go to that IP, but with HTTPS in front of it and port 9080. And this is all in the instructions. And this takes me to the Content Fusion admin page, so the sign up screen or sign in screen. Once I sign in, you have various settings that you can change. For example, you can manage your license, or if you want to set up your own mail server, you can use LDAP authentication. There's some maintenance options, for example, creating database backup. And the Web Author tab gives you access to another admin page, and this is for Web Author. And for Content Fusion purposes, it's the editor, the built-in editor. And again, here you have various options that can be configured. You can upload plugins to extend the functionality. I told you that one of the benefits is that you can use custom frameworks. So you can upload custom frameworks using this page. And then back in Oxygen, the content author would just need to sign into that enterprise server using the same IP address. And again, it's going to want me to sign in. And authorize. And now I'm signed into my enterprise server. And now I'm going to show you some examples of some custom frameworks and customization options and whatnot. So back in the admin page in the frameworks tab, these lightweight data frameworks are custom frameworks of sorts. These are already pre-installed, so they don't need to be uploaded, but I'll show you the difference. This was the original Iris topic. This is a lightweight data version of the same data map and the same topic. You'll notice that there's some inline hints, inline actions, and this is done in the framework configuration. So if I go to document type association, here's the lightweight data frameworks, and all of the settings for this framework are defined here in this configuration dialog box. For example, those inline hints and actions that you saw are defined in some custom CSS files that are referenced in that framework. So if I send files through Content Fusion using the lightweight data framework, this time I'll send multiple files. And you'll see that since I sent multiple files, I see all of them. And also in this screen, you see all of them on the left-hand side so that you can review them one at a time. And notice that the reviewer has access to these same inline hints and actions. So they see the same thing that the content author sees. They're both using the same framework. And of course, if that framework was not uploaded, they wouldn't see the same thing. Now I explained that if you're using DITA and you specify a context DITA map, that all the references will be resolved. But what if it's not a DITA topic? Here's an example of a custom XML file. It has a custom color for the background that's defined in a simple CSS file, and it references a few images. Now, if I send this file alone, just like it is, the reviewer doesn't see the background color or the images. Remember, I told you that you could drag and drop from this file system, or the system file explorer, sorry. So this time I'm going to also send the CSS file and the images, and you'll see the difference. So you see that they still only see the one XML file, but snapshots of those other files were also sent behind the scenes. They aren't editable, so of course you can't open them here, but if we open the XML file, you see that the reviewer also sees the custom background and the images. This next example was actually inspired by some users. So their scenario was that they were a small team of technical writers, and they collaborated with engineers out in the field. And they didn't want the engineers to be able to edit the entire document, just certain parts of it. And so we created a custom framework that's similar to this. So suppose I have this file, this document, and I don't want the reviewer, whoever I'm sending it to be able to edit any of this content. All I want them to do is to contribute whatever code should be in this code block, and I want them to be able to select the language for the output class attribute. So we've created a framework to do this, to achieve this. And back in the admin page in the framework tab, I need to upload that custom framework. It's very simple. Once I've uploaded it, I need to restart the server, and that doesn't take very long here. So now it's uploaded. Now if I send, this file, you'll see that the reviewer can't edit the other parts of the document. They can add content in the code block, and they can select the language for the output class. So this was a very simple example of creating a custom framework where they wanted to achieve something very specific. Now you can also customize various options and other features. Back in the Content Fusion user guide, there's this topic about customizing options, and it explains that there's an options.xml file. It's located in this folder. Of course, this is within your server configuration. And there's a lot of different options that you can configure. I'm just going to show you an example of one. It's this one. So by default, this option is set to false, which means that it is not going to show comment nodes. And I'm going to change that to true so that it does. And I'll show you what I mean. So I'll go back to this original iris document. And at the bottom, you'll see that I have content that's commented out. And this is a scenario that actually happens to us every now and then. A developer may add a new feature for the upcoming release, but then for whatever reason, maybe it'll get pushed back to the release after that. And if I've already documented, I don't want to delete it and have to do it all over again. So I'll just comment out that section and add a note to myself to remember to untoggle the comment. By the way, this is very simple to do. You just select the content and then in refactoring, toggle comment, or use Control-Shift comma. So this XML this content that is now an XML comment will not be shown in the published output. And because that option that I just showed you is by default set to false, it won't be shown when you send this document to the reviewer either. But here's an example of the options XML file. This is the option here, and you'll see that I set it to true. And this is the options XML file for our enterprise solution. So remember, I sent this same document before using the public server, but now I'm going to send it using our enterprise server. And since that option is now set to true instead of the default false, you'll see that now the reviewer can also see that content. If I go back to the original one that was sent in through the public server, you'll see that it's not shown here. So that's just another small example of customizing an option, and there's a lot of different things that you can do. So these were just a few examples of how Content Fusion can be customized, the Content Fusion Enterprise solution, particularly to suit specific needs, but the customization possibilities are virtually limitless. So the last thing I want to discuss is to make you aware of some of our future plans for Content Fusion. You will have the ability to deploy it on Red Hat. You will have the ability to create a task directly from the browser. We'll have improved support for XML vocabularies other than DITA, for example, DocBook. There'll be improvements to DITA profiling features. You'll have the possibility of editing reference content for DITA documents. As it is, if you send a document with content references, the reviewer can see the conreft content, but they aren't able to click it and edit it, but in the future they will be able to. There'll be the ability to make concurrent changes rather than incremental. Some teams, organizations want the ability for the changes to be concurrent. We'll add a due date feature, and you'll have the ability to assign a reviewer in the interface instead of sending the link to them. So this concludes my portion of the webinar, but before I send the controls over to my colleague to recap some of the popular questions and answer them, I want to make you aware of a few more free webinars coming up in the next few weeks. So next Wednesday, May 15th, a colleague will present a webinar called When DITA Meets Markdown, and he'll discuss and compare those two popular formats and discuss possibilities. For example, if an organization has some contributors who use DITA and other contributors who use Markdown, he'll discuss how they can be used together seamlessly. And then in 2 weeks from today, Wednesday, May 22nd, I'll present a webinar called Getting Started with Oxygen. This is intended for new users. We get lots of comments that when new users first start using Oxygen, the interface is a bit intimidating and they're not exactly sure where to begin. So this webinar will be dedicated to that type of user, and we'll explore the interface and provide tips and show how to do various getting started tasks depending on what various needs are. And you can see the details on our website in the events page. So thank you for attending and listening, and now I'll send the controls to my colleague Christy, who will answer some questions.
Hello, I'm Christian Tălău. I'm the lead of the Content Fusion development team, and I will go through the questions asked during the webinar. If you did not have the chance to ask a question, you can do it now by using the questions section in the GoToWebinar interface, or during the next days, you can use our support email address, which is support@oxygenxml.com. First, there was a question: what if a reviewer forgets to exit or just leaves their browser open? Is there a timeout for Content Fusion? The answer is yes. The task is automatically unlocked if the user is idle for 2 minutes. Stephen is now showing you how the interface looks like. They have a continue editing button to resume editing if no one else locked the task in the meantime. In the upcoming release, we plan to make some improvements to automatically resume editing if the user wants to start again after an idle period. Another question was related to what format are the snapshots stored in. Stephen at some point mentions that Content Fusion uploads snapshots of the XML files to the Content Fusion server. What happens is that Content Fusion collects the files that you dropped in the side view, and also all the files that are referenced in the context data map that you specified, and uploads them as simple XML files, which are then opened by WebAuthor in the web browser. Another question is related to profiling conditions, I guess. It says that if the data values for a particular project are resolved so that the reviewer only sees the relevant content. What happens now is that if you have profiling conditions, the element that has the conditions applied is annotated to represent the conditions that apply for that element. For example, if you are documenting a phone and the display size is 5.5 inches only for some product, then the text will be display size column 5.5, and then with a green background it will say if product is X10, or the name of the product. In the future, we plan to enable users to upload a dataval file besides the data map file that they upload currently. It is already supported in WebAuthor. We just have to implement this feature in the Content Fusion interface. Stephen is now showing you how a topic with profiling condition looks in the desktop application, and now he will open it in the web browser. So it will be clear for the users how that element is profiled. There was another question about a tutorial question, whether there will be access to a recording of this webinar. It will be, the webinar is recorded and it will be made available on our website, oxygenxml.com, in the events section. There you can also find past webinars and also other conference talks that people from Oxygen gave. There was another question about data profiling, which is, so the answer is similar with the previous one. Another question, if I send the review to several people at the same time, can each reviewer see the comments from the other? The answer is yes. So all the comments can be seen by all the reviewers. They just cannot add comments at the same time. So if one user locks the file, he can add comments, and then after he leaves, when someone else opens the file, they will see the comments that the first reviewer added. In the future, we have plans to enable multiple people to comment on the same file. This is like a short-term feature. In a longer-term feature, we plan also to enable editing by multiple people, but we rarely see this requirement from our users. Another question is, how is pricing determined, and whether the webinar is recorded. The pricing is available on our website. We have 5 licensing packages, which differ only in the number of floating browser licenses, which means, so Stephen is now showing you the website. So the first package means that 5 people can review XML files at the same time. So you have 5 seats for people to open the web browser and review files. Another question is, can you send an entire map for review, or is it only at files/topic level? What you can do is to right click. So if you open the map in the data maps manager, you have to right click the root of the data map and say add to review task, and Oxygen offers to automatically add the nested resources to the review task. So all the topics will be uploaded, and they will appear in the review task as a tree structure. So they will be indented according to their level in the data map. And one last question. If I made Java customizations to the standalone Oxygen, such as changing the menu actions, can I make those customizations available in Fusion? Content Fusion has the same format for plugins and frameworks as the desktop application. Sometimes most of the time frameworks are compatible. So if you made changes to the framework configurations using our document type configuration dialog box, then those changes will be automatically available in Content Fusion. But if you implemented a dialog using Java Swing, then it cannot work in a web browser. You have to implement a similar dialog using web technologies. But except for this kind of user interface components, you can basically reuse your work. So, and those were all the questions. Thank you again for attending the webinar. Thank you, Stephen, for presenting. I hope to see you again at the next webinars.